Hello world, and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, architect at Winelect, and today we're going to be looking at Helm Charts with Kubernetes. Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about a package manager called Helm for Kubernetes. Now, a package manager is not a new concept in computing. It's been around for quite some time, and it really kind of came out of the Linux world in a lot of ways. But what a package manager does is it allows you to use a command line utility or even a graphical front end to install software into an operating system, or in this case, an environment. So what that allows you to do is simply run one command and it will download binaries from a source that is usually a repository of some kind, and then it will install those binaries on your system and then configure them with a baseline configuration with a single command. So you don't have to sit there and compile all of the code. You don't have to sit there and try to figure out how to make it all work and configure it, figure out all the dependencies and all of those kinds of things. You simply just run the package manager and it handles a lot of those complexities for you, especially the dependencies. Now, within the context of Windows, there's one called Chocolatey, which you may have used to install many common open source projects on Windows. And then in the Mac space, there's something called Homebrew. And then naturally in the Linux space, there is apt, which is very popular in the Debian distros. And then you have Red Hat based distros, which use Yum. And all of those kind of do very similar things. Now, in the Kubernetes space, we're not dealing with an operating system. We're dealing with an environment that is used to scale, monitor, and manage containers. And so what we have to do here is adapt that idea of a package manager to Kubernetes. And that's what Helm is attempting to do. So what it attempts to do is take many common applications such as Nginx or Redis and deliver those to you by way of a package manager and something that's already pre-configured. So you basically tell it the parameters you want, and then it will install it onto your Kubernetes cluster. So you don't have to figure out what images to use. You don't have to figure out the manifest files for all that. You don't have to figure out any of that. You simply just use a Helm chart as the package manager is called, and then it will install that for you. Now, while Helm is very useful for installing many pre-configured applications, it can also be used for configuring and distributing your own applications. And this is very common for folks that want to implement some kind of versioning into their application. And the ability to deploy that with Helm gives you the ability to manage even different versions of an application in a single cluster. So that's what Helm is really attempting to do, is provide you a way to abstract away some of the complexities of trying to manage a lot of those packages in a very more manual process that you have with something like manifest files, and then provide some kind of automation on top of manifest files so that you can then create something that is redistributable in multiple systems, and then also make multiple versions of that available on multiple systems too, across a wide variety of different kinds of Kubernetes infrastructure, whether that be Google Compute, whether it be Azure, EKS on Amazon, and many other on-premise implementations of that as well. So I'm not going to really show you how to install packages with Helm today. I'm really going to focus more on building your own packages. So let's go take a look at what one of these looks like and how you can use it in your own applications for building out these kinds of automations around manifest files. And then we're going to deploy one to a Kubernetes cluster that I've already created. Now, the first thing you'll want to do is install Helm, and ironically, Helm is going to be installed by a package manager, probably in most contexts, whatever operating system you're going to be running. So you can install the binaries, or you can use any one of those package managers that I just mentioned to install the package manager for Kubernetes. So you could use Homebrew on a Mac, you could use Chocolatey on Windows, or apt or Yum on any one of the Linux distros that are supported by that. So you can go out to Google, just Google install Helm, and then you will get a link to this webpage, and it will show you how to install Helm on your particular system, whatever that might be. Once you have Helm installed, you should be able to type Helm into a PowerShell session, bash session, command prompt, whatever it might be, and it should give you some kind of output. Otherwise, it won't show you whatever it is you're using. So you want to make sure that your Helm is installed before you start running commands. So this would validate that you've installed it correctly. Now, when you create a Helm chart, you can go Helm, and then you go create, and then you give it a name. I've already created one in this folder. I'm just going to show you an example though if I run this command, and it's going to create a new folder, and it's going to put some basic data in that folder. So let me come over here to this demo folder here that I've created. I've already created this one. This is the one I just ran a few seconds ago, and it put out some files into this directory structure here. And I want to walk through these files because it's important to get the taxonomy of these files so that you will know where things are represented inside of a Helm chart. So this chart file is kind of the entry point for the file and the Helm chart itself that you're trying to install. And if you open it up, it's just got some metadata about the actual thing that you're trying to install. So you can say that it's got the name, the description, and you can change all these values, but you can come down here and change these versions and app versions and things like that. For our purposes today, we're not going to get into the particulars of this file because it's not as important. I just want to point these out to you, and it's pretty much self-documenting if you read the comments here in this file. The other file that is important here is this values file. Now, this values file contains a bunch of settings that you can configure whenever you go to create your particular instance of whatever you're installing. So this would be the file that you as a user want to modify when you go to deploy a Helm chart that you might have got from the internet that you're customizing or whatever. And you can also override anything in this file from the command prompt as well. So you can, but this values file is where you're going to change certain settings about a given application. And notice I can change like the service type here for this particular instance, or whatever this demo or this basic template that is created. I could change this from cluster IP to load balancer, and that would be the type of service I would be exposing through this. Now, what this created was not a functional app. Well, more or less a functional app. It was basically just a empty shell, but it's not very useful, but it's a good resource for getting a lot of help when you're trying to figure out what something should look like in a Helm chart. Now I'm going to go look at my example that I created because it's much simpler than what this creates. And the reason I created a very simple version is so that you could have some pretty good exposure to this without getting lost in the weeds on what Helm is trying to do. So notice in this example I have here, I have those values file, and that chart file. Now the chart file I've left as is. I haven't changed that at all. My values file though is pretty basic. I have 3 parameters in here, or 3 values that I want to populate, and I'm going to be using these in my Helm chart. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute for my templates. So I've got a password set, I've got a port number, and a load balancer. And so these are things I'm going to use inside of my templates whenever I'm going to deploy these. So keep this in mind. So let's go over and look at my templates folder now. Now, in the example that I created just a second ago, the templates folder has a bunch of examples that you can use for creating many common things in Kubernetes, like deployments or ingress or service or service account. These things are very common. So it gives you some basic templates that you can use and customize for your applications. And then you can take those and strip out anything that you don't need. And that is pretty much what I did, as I took these and I looked at them and then stripped them out. And this is how I actually learned how to use Helm, is by looking at a lot of these kinds of examples and looking at other examples online. But once you have the hang of it, it's really not that hard to use. It's just you have to get that manifest file built first, because if you go in here and look at these Helm file, these YAML files here, they're going to be basically the manifest files that you would create otherwise for Kubernetes. Notice we have APIs and deployment types of kind, metadata, a spec, and you can also use these to create secrets and any number of other things on Kubernetes as well, using the templates that this has. Now, everything that's inside of these double curly braces here is part of the templating engine that is implemented with Helm. So all of these have various meanings in them. So these are things that it would get out of the values file and out of the environment, and it would import these into your manifest file template here. And then once it generates that manifest file, it's going to then deploy it to Kubernetes. So let's go look at my manifest file. It's actually much less verbose than what we're looking at here. So let's go back up to my demo folder here and go back into my chart here. That's very simple. I only have a single YAML file here. And one other file here that I want to mention, this is a helper file, helper template file, and it's got a bunch of predefined values in it. Leave that file alone. That has a lot of the kinds of things that are predefined values in it. And Helm uses this to inject certain things into your files that are more or less like predefined variables. So don't delete this. It's an important file. If you do delete it, you'll get a bunch of errors when you go to deploy your particular manifest file. And then once you have that not deleted, but everything else cleaned out, you can put in your manifest files here into this templates folder, and then you can start adapting these for Helm. And this is one that I've used before. It's my Commander King demo that I've used in other ones, and I've taken it and I've adapted it basically to use Helm. So instead of hard coding a bunch of values in it, I am populating a lot of these values with things from the environment or things from that values file. So this right here again is from the environment. So keen.fullname is going to give me the full name of this particular deployment, and that's what it's going to call this service. And that's basically the one I'm going to enter on the command line once I create this. Then I'm using that over and over for the label for the app, for the name of the service. I'm using it for the name of the deployment as well as to match the app label here. And then I'm using it again down here in this labels for the template for the actual deployment that I'm going for. Now, a couple other things that I have defined here are from the values file itself. This is where I got the type that I'm deploying to here. So for the type, I'm reading that out of the values file, which is this file, not this one. That's the sample one it generates. I don't want that one. I want this one. It's reading it out of this file right here. So it's going to substitute that double curly braces with load balancer. It's going to substitute the port with port 80 right here. And there is the port right here. So I can change the port of the service, but it's going to be basically a static port on the backend deployment that this service is exposing. So basically you can put in any port that's valid, port 8080 if you wanted to, or port 9215 or something like that. And then you can set a target port, in this case, target port 80. And that is what's going to be exposed on the backend. Now, I can also use this to set environment variables as well if I want to. And you can set secrets, but in most production-oriented applications, I wouldn't use a password as an environment variable. But for this instance, I'm using it as a demo. And what I have here is a parameter or environment variable called password, and is reading the value for this particular environment variable out of my values file right here. And that's what I have set inside of my values file up here. So it's going to substitute password 123 into my Keen YAML file here where it sees this. So with that, you can then deploy this to a Kubernetes cluster. But when you're working on these, you don't necessarily want to deploy these to debug them. You can actually debug them without actually having to run a full deployment on that. So let's flip over to a command line and look at the commands to do that. And then once I'm satisfied with that, I can go and deploy this to a Kubernetes cluster. I'm back here in my PowerShell session, and I can run a command that can actually be used to debug this. So I'm going to hit up arrow since I've already run this command. It's called Helm Install, and then I can give it the name, and then I'm going to do a --dry run --debug. Now what this will do is a dry run against this particular chart, and what that does is it validates it, looks for any issues with it, but it doesn't actually install it onto Kubernetes. And then by doing a --debug, it will give me very verbose output of what it is actually doing. And then this last parameter here, this /keen, is the folder that I created when I did a create against my Helm a minute ago. And so I'm going to run this, and it will give me the debug output for everything that I have created here. Now, I didn't have any issues with this. So if I had any issues, it would give me some kind of error output. But since it didn't have any issues, it's going to show me everything about this pretty much. It's going to give me the name, the computed values from my values file. And then it's going to show the manifest that it generates from those particular insertions that it did. So this is the actual manifest file that it generated for me from the templates that we just looked at. And you can see where it injected load balancer into the particular type here. You can see where it injected the port right here. You can see where it injected the name, my key for the app, and the name of the deployment. And you can see where it injected the password right here from the values file as well. So that will give you an idea of what your manifest file is going to look like, as well as show you any kind of syntax or other kind of issues that you might have with your chart that you're trying to generate. So once you have that chart defined and everything looks good, you can actually install it using Helm as well. So instead of calling a dry run or debug, I can simply just call install, and then I'm going to do my key and then specify that chart. And then once it's done installing, you should be able to access it just like you would if you were using a manifest file here. So let's do some kube commands here and let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to kubectl get pods, and it's got my pod up and running. And if I do get service, I should be able to see my service up and running as well. So I should be able to launch a new browser window right here. And I could browse to that particular IP address that it generated for me on the service. And that should have my Commander Keen pod already up and running. And let's wait for this to connect. Okay, now that I'm connected, I should be able to click on this VNC right here. And we've seen this before. Now, if I type in the password that I created as part of my values file, or I could just come over here and copy and paste it as well, instead of having to type that in, I can come back over here. I should be able to paste that in and connect to this guy. And there it is. So I now have my Commander Keen demo up and running. So I can go C and go CD Keen, I think is the folder. And there it is. And I can install this and install Commander Keen in a pod that is running by a way of Helm. And then I can launch the game and then play the game, because this is already well within the container itself. So I am well on my way beyond what Helm is responsible for. This is actually the container running at this point. So, and this seems to be running pretty well. I just rebuilt this container today with some new tech that I've been trying to play with, and it seems to be working all right now. So again, a new way of deploying things using Helm Charts. Instead of having to just use Helm manifest files for everything, you can use Helm Charts as a way to redistribute your app and then be able to parameterize your manifest files even more so than what you could do with a strict manifest file and the likes with a config map or other kind of ways of deploying it. So thanks for watching this episode of Tech on Fire with Blaze. We'll be transitioning into another topic next week. We'll be getting off of containers and we'll be launching into a session on Azure Active Directory and other security technology on Azure. So I'm looking forward to doing that series going forward. So thanks for watching again. I'll see you next time.
If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintelect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintelect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintelect on Twitter at WintelectNow or at Wintelect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintelect.com. Until next time, thank you.